הרשות הפלסטינית היא נטל וחמאס הוא נכס, באותו מגרש בינלאומי. במשחק הזה של הדה-לגיטימציה, תחשבו על זה לרגע, הרשות הפלסטינית היא נטל וחמאס הוא נכס, הוא ארגון טרור, אף אחד לא יכיר בו, אף אחד לא ייתן לו מעמד ב-ICC, אף אחד לא ייתן לו להוביל החלטה במועצת הביטחון, ואז נצטרך וטו אמריקאי או לא נצטרך וטו אמריקאי. אני לא בטוח שלנו היום, שוב, בהינתן שהמשחק המרכזי, המגרש המרכזי שבו אנחנו משחקים עכשיו הוא הדה-לגיטימציה הבינלאומית, שם אבו מאזן מפיל בנו חללים משמעותיים, וחמאס בנקודה הזאת לפי דעתי יהיה נכס. אני לא חושב שאני צריך לחשוש מזה.
This video was doesn't tell us that doesn't outright thought. On the other hand, we are alarmed if this is made this Secularists is not. This was not I do want to talk about the organization, the history of Hamas, and how Israel used it as an asset to delegitimize Palestine organizations to basically the ultimate goal was to stop any type of peace talks between the groups and the European International Theater, because the fear was to bring about a two-state solution. And let's go to an article that was written recently by Tal Schneider, right? And it's in the Times of Israel. For years, Netanyahu propped up Hamas. Now it's blown up in our faces. For years, the various governments led by Benjamin Netanyahu took an approach that divided power between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, bringing Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas to his knees while making moves that propped up the Hamas terror group. The idea was to prevent Abbas or anyone else in the Palestine Authority's West Bank government from advancing toward the establishment of a Palestinian state. Thus, amid this bid to impair Abbas, Hamas was upgraded from a mere terror group to an organization with which Israel held indirect negotiations via Egypt, the one that was allowed to receive infusions of cash from abroad, most notably Qatar. In 2019, there were domestic reports that were leaked to the press regarding how the Israeli government allowed Qatar to funnel millions of dollars through Egypt to which kept money flowing into Gaza, meaning food for families and the ability to purchase basic products. Israeli officials said these permits, which allow Gazan laborers to earn higher salaries than they would in the enclave, were a powerful tool to help preserve calm. Toward the end of Netanyahu's fifth government in 2021, approximately 2,000 to 3,000 work permits were issued to Gazans. This number climbed to 5,000, and during the Bennett-Lapid government, rose sharply to 10,000. So in other words, they allow more work permits for Gazans to work in Israel outside of Gaza, and basically not go through the hours and hours of checkpoints, military checkpoints that they need to go through when they leave Gaza or when they re-enter Gaza. Since Netanyahu returned to power in January of 2023, the number of work permits has soared to nearly 20,000. Additionally, since 2014, Netanyahu-led governments have practically turned a blind eye to the incendiary balloons and rocket fire from Gaza. Meanwhile, Israel has allowed suitcases holding millions of Qatari cash to enter Gaza through its crossings since 2018 in order to maintain its fragile ceasefire with the Hamas rulers of the Strip. Now, what's wrong with this picture? because Hamas, according to the Israeli government and to the United Nations Security Council, is designated a terrorist group. What is Hamas? And to give you the simple definition, Hamas is the Haraka al founder, Ahmed Yassin, actually is like I said, a Palestinian nationalist cleric. He served as a spiritual leader. He's quadriplegic, and he's I think he's blind or he's close to being blind. And he was in an accident of some sorts, and he was in a wheelchair. He an accident when he was very young. And Ahmed Yassin had basically attended Al-Azhar University in Cairo, where he was unable to pursue his career there because of his deteriorated health, and he was forced to be educated from home for the rest of his life. His followers, the Palestinian and Muslim Brotherhood, actually believe that his worldly knowledge made him one of the best speakers in the Gaza Strip during that time in the early 1980s and late 1970s. He got a post later on as the Arabic language teacher at Ramal in Gaza. By the way, if you haven't heard, Ramallah is basically non-existent because the Israeli airplanes have basically destroyed it. And wanted to basically cause a resistance type of a reactionary type of incident, a resistance movement. And Yassin basically said that they needed to react in a manner as the protests would spark a negative reaction, causing them to be either killed or destroyed, right off the bat. So what happened was Yassin and the Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood actually made thousands and thousands of these leaflets denouncing the Israeli military. And in December, I don't know the date, actually called for a resistance to mark their first public intervention. And basically, the name Hamas came shortly afterwards. Yassin was not actually directly connected to the organization, but he gave it its blessing. And these Muslim Brotherhood, Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood resistance workers later became the founders of the group called Hamas. And the Israeli government basically saw them as an asset, as you heard from the Israeli minister there in the beginning of the video, regarding how Israel saw them as an asset. Now, there's been a couple of articles over the years that have come out and basically, reported on this, how Israel saw them as a useful asset in basically defeating other socialist leftist movements like the PLO, like the Palestinian Authority, to destroy peace talks or force peace talks with the Israeli government and force a two-state solution. Now, in 2018, there was an article by the Times of Israel that wrote Hamas is Israel's own creation. Now, I wouldn't go that far, right? I gave you the real basic foundation of how Hamas was created. It was created through the Jordanian Muslim Brotherhood and basically through Palestinian resistance fighters who wanted to protest against the Israeli military's use of force in killing Palestinian day workers in 1987. Well, here we go. I'm going to read you this article. It's pretty good. It was posted in 2018. You can't see it there, but it's right there. During the 1970s, the greatest enemy to Israel was known as the Palestinian Liberation Organization, headed by Yasser Arafat, who was known for waging terror attacks on Israeli civilians and targets all over the world. Not necessarily true, because the offshoot of the PLO was Fatah, headed by Abu Nidal. Abu Nidal saw Yasser Arafat as weak, suggesting that we need to go on the offensive as a form of, instead of going on the defense while being attacked by the Israeli military. The PLO basically said, no, this will actually ruin our image toward the European international theater like Spain, Germany, and France, who were actually sympathizing with the plight of the Palestinians in the early 1970s. It just so happened an offshoot of this PLO wing called PLO Fatah, headed by Abu Nidal. Basically, Abu Nidal was the world's first terrorist organizer and basically conducted a mass amount of assassinations and terrorist incidents, one being the 1988 Vienna and Italy terrorist airport attacks. There was an article I wrote many years ago, 5, 6 years ago, 7 years ago about this, actually. It's one of the first articles I ever wrote. The PLO was known for being a socialist organization whose sole purpose was the elimination of the state of Israel, along with the establishment of a socialist state of Palestine, where the constitution would run by secular Marxism rather than Islam. Now, during this time, you had a number of the religious edicts in Jordan, in Egypt, that fought against these Marxists that basically came out of the ideology called Nasserism or Arab nationalism, which basically was the primary primary ideology in countries that didn't have an Islamist problem, like Afghanistan, Libya, Iraq, for example, Iran, and Syria. They enjoyed Western lifestyle. There was no women wearing niqabs and burqas. But all that's about to change, because after the 6-Day War, the people, the poorer people, basically saw these corrupt nationalist regimes as nothing but weak and embarrassing, because we lost to the state of Israel. 3 countries lost to the state of Israel in the 6-Day War, and we need new leadership. Well, here came the Islamists and their rise to prominence, which came through the oil boom of Saudi Arabia in the 70s, and of course in the 1980s, where they rose to prominence in Egypt and in Pakistan. Due to the short-sightedness of the Rabin administration, later Menachem Begin, there was an idea to bring about a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood into Gaza and the Palestinian territories to counterbalance the strength and popularity of the PLO. So in other words, Israel didn't create Hamas, but they helped facilitate its growth, right? In the same way the United States did with Islamist organizations. How? In 1979, when the Soviets invaded Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, what happened was the United States, along with Pakistan, and in fact, the United States had to go through Pakistan because Afghan and Arab fighters would not deal directly with the West. So non-government organizations had to go through Pakistan, such as military aid or funding, went through the ISI, and the ISI gave it to the rebels, or later on called the jihadists, in Afghanistan. And we gave billions of dollars in aid, and it came from the CIA's own program called Operation Cyclone. Basically was the most successful CIA operation to date. It was a huge program that basically, along with the ISI and Saudi financing, as well as the British and Israelis, and God knows who else was involved, giving covert, clandestine assistance to the Arab and Afghan Mujahideen. Now, the majority of these fighters were Afghans. I think it was like 92% of the fighting force in Afghanistan were Afghans. Very few were Arabs. Nevertheless, near the end of the war, the Arabs basically were training at these camps in Pakistan and on the border of Afghanistan near the Paktia province. And by the way, these Arab and Afghan training camps later became training camps for who? Al-Qaeda, Jemaah Islamiyah, Abu Sayyaf in the Philippines, Jemaah Islamiyah in Indonesia, and Al-Qaeda in the United States, and of course in Afghanistan. And of course, from there, you had, the Islamic State and al-Nusra and Ansar al-Islam and all these other Islamic sects in Syria and Iraq, right? Now, all that weapon and training went to these people, the Afghans and Arabs, basically the Arabs later on. And they took this training and weaponry back home, where they stood in these training camps and learned to even use them further and became even more hardened battle fighters over the years. And a lot of these fighters actually made to become the hierarchy of Al-Qaeda, specifically these individuals, Abu Hafs al-Masri, Abu Ubaidah al-Banshiri, and Mahmoud Salim. And if you don't know those names, they're actually from Egypt, and they were former military career officers and policemen who actually joined with Al-Qaeda and basically made up of the military committee, which basically trained future Arabs who wanted to join Al-Qaeda into the arts of guerrilla warfare. And where did they get that training from? Well, they got it from the United States and their own CIA Operation Cyclone program and the Pakistan ISI. Thanks a lot, CIA, ISI. Well, in the same way that the Israelis gave initial assistance, weapons training to these people now called Hamas, who were basically the Jordanian Muslim Brotherhood and Palestinian resistance fighters, who were basically not fighting the PLO or the Palestinian Authority, but were fighting against the oppressive Israeli government and its military against the oppression of the Palestinians. That's how Hamas came about. Now, you're not going to hear that in the media. They're not going to tell you the truth. They're going to tell you, well, Hamas is a terrorist organization. Well, they're not going to tell you where they're originally from and how they were given military aid, because then we'll start asking questions. And God forbid we start asking questions and learn about the real history. In the early 70s, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin started the organization Mujama al-Islamiyah, which helped establish the Islamic University in Gaza, hospitals, and schools. And the Israeli military knew about him and knew what they were doing. Knew that Yassin was a radical, knew that Yassin was part of the Muslim Brotherhood, knew that Yassin basically started up his own organization, al-Islamiyah, knew that he was teaching this doctrine in hospitals and, in schools and at the Islamic University in Gaza. Just like the United States was funding the Taliban in their fight in Afghanistan against the Soviets to bring down the communists, so too was Israel selling arms to Iran to fight their arch enemy Iraq during the 80s, right? A bold article here. Precursor to Hamas was the Muslim Brotherhood, who was persecuted by the secular Ba'athist government of Egypt to the point their leader, Sayyid Qutb, was executed in Egypt in 1966. Sheikh Yassin was on such good terms with Israel's state that he would receive treatment in Israeli hospitals. Sound familiar? I just had a very good interview with J.G. Michaels at Parallax Views. We talked about this history regarding Israel giving medical aid to Salafists. In 2014, for example, or 2013, Israeli hospitals at the Golan Heights were actually giving medical aid to al-Nusra fighters. Those are Salafi fundamentalists, an al-Qaeda affiliate, fighting against the Assyrian government. Oh, give them aid because that's who we want out. And that's basically, now we're talking about Israeli foreign policy, right? American foreign policy. The two intertwined. Because that's who we were at war with. We weren't at war with just al-Qaeda and the affiliates. In fact, we were on war with them on the face, but we were funding them behind the back. And if you don't know anything about Timber Sycamore, please look it up. A CIA special activities operation, along with Israel, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, were giving military aid to al-Qaeda affiliates in Syria to overthrow the Assad government. According to Andrew Higgin, Israel's military-led administration in Gaza looked favorably on the paraplegic cleric, who set up a whole wide network of schools, clinics, and a library and kindergartens. Sheikh Yassin formed the Islamist group Mujama al-Islamiyah, which was officially recognized by Israel as a charity, and then in 1979 as an association. Israel also endorsed the establishment of the Islamic University of Gaza, which is now regarded as a hotbed of militancy. Oops, right? Oops. Do you think they knew what they were doing? See, they didn't create the Frankenstein monster. What they did was they gave the electricity in the bolts of his neck. That's what they did. Should have left them on the table. The university was one of the first targets hit by the Israeli warplanes in the 2008 Operation Cast Lead. Well, we got to hide our evidence in helping to facilitate this group. Many Israeli government officials saw the improvement of the quality of life in the Palestinian territories as a way to prevent radicalization of the Arab residents. So in 1979, Mujama al-Islamiyah got the status as a charity organization. A charity. Oh my goodness. During the 1980s, clashes between secular and Islamist supporters became more common, and there was a rift growing in Palestinian society between secularists and Islamists, like I said. In the book called The Caravan, written by Thomas Edgehammer, which is a must-read. It's the preeminent book based on the biography of Abdullah Yusuf Azam, known as the father of modern-day jihad, and talked about the clashes between university students in Cairo and in Jordan between the militants, Islamic militants, and the socialists at these universities, and how this shaped Abdullah Yusuf Azam's vision of that Islam cannot be compatible with socialism. In the same way that Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, the co-leader of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad Cairo branch, and later the emir of al-Qaeda, actually grew up in a very wealthy family and saw the detriments of socialism and communism. And that's why he joined, as a very young man, the Muslim Brotherhood, because they saw this as non-compatible with Islam, their version of Islam, which is Salafi Islam or Wahhabi Islam. Israeli military thinking during this time figured it would be great if the Islamists and socialists were to continue fighting each other, since it would take away from their focus on fighting Israel. Now, this is not the only article. You go back to, say, the Intercept. Before they vowed to annihilate Hamas, Israeli officials considered it an asset. This is Alice Sperry. This is October 14, 2023. Israeli President Isaac Herzog said this week that as far as military is concerned, there's little difference between Gaza's civilian population and Hamas. Might as well kill them all. I mean, just to be on the safe side, right? To hell with international criminal courts, Rome statutes. To hell with Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, what they think. We got the United States on our side. They're not going to say anything. We'll do whatever we want, right? Hamas, and that's, Herzog's remarks represents Israeli policymakers' long-time conflation of Hamas with all Palestinians in Gaza, and often with all Palestinians everywhere. And that's why they're flattening whole neighborhoods and killing everybody, because, hey, it could be, they could be Hamas-oriented, affiliated. Better be safe than sorry. Shouldn't have attacked us. Well, maybe you shouldn't have built an open-air prison, which is what Gaza is. That's not me saying it. That's every human rights organization and the International Criminal Court saying it. Right? Such attitudes have hardened in the past week. The Israeli Defense Forces, for example, posted that you either stand with Israel or you stand with terrorism. Many U.S. politicians have issued similar claims. Anyone that is pro-Palestinian is pro-Hamas, said Marjorie Taylor Greene. That's the conservatives. In this country, there are a bunch of whack jobs. Hamas, in that sense, have been a convenient presence for Israel, whose leaders have favored the militant group over the Palestinian Authority. The Suedo government established during the Oslo peace process to administer the Palestinian territories until the details of a sovereign Palestinian state could be negotiated, while Hamas has been enemy number one in Israel rhetoric for years, offering a cover for Israel to maintain its blockade and periodically kill hundreds of Palestinians in Gaza. Exactly right. That's exactly right. That's why Hamas still exists. Because like I said in previous videos, in news videos I made these last week, was that Hamas was allowed to exist because this allows for the Israeli military, from orders of the Israeli government, to basically continue its blockade, to continue to control the daily lives of Gazans, to control what comes in and out, and make life miserable for these people because they hate them. They hate them. Don't believe me? Look at what makes up Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet, and you'll know the thoughts of these people that have been going on for decades. Now they're just saying it out loud because nobody's ever held them accountable. Nobody. Israel leaders seem to believe the strategic calculation could hold indefinitely. They have determined that the situation of constant political instability and violence is preferable over making some kind of larger political agreement that would actually lead to a final status outcome to bring peace between Israelis and Palestinians. And that comes from Palestinian political analyst Yusuf Munir, who I follow on Twitter. And they've chosen this path over that. And I think we are seeing the results of a full-on display in recent days, because Israel didn't want to give up more territory to the Palestinians. Didn't want to get rid of the military blockades. Didn't want to live amongst these people like they used to many hundreds of years ago, when there was no Islamist problem. Thank you, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, for that. Thank you, Egypt, for that. And of course, there's this article from Foreign Policy, what you need to know about the Israeli-Hamas war. I'm going to put this in the bottom of the description for you to read. And basically, all this information, of course, I'm always going to make accessible for you. It's not as black and white as the news is making it out to be, or as some policymakers in the United States government make it out to be, that there is either Israel or there's terrorism. Either there's black or there's right, because the world is gray. And what you think is this or that, it's the other way, or it's totally different. We don't know nothing. We know very little about ourselves. But with the little information out there, and what little that we do know, is totally being ignored. And in this case, regarding just this short history I went over with Hamas and Israel, who's talking about it? Is it the Israeli or U.S. national media? Is it the global media? Is it these Islamist programs or these Islamist groups? Are the socialists or the nationalists talking about it? No, they're too busy fighting each other over it, over what they believe is to be the truth. Because to finally find out what the truth of the matter is, we can actually solve the problem. All right, guys, that's it for this video. And like I said, any updates, which they're going to be, of course, I'm going to let you know about it as soon as it comes out. Have a good day, everybody.